A mutiny, a psychopath, and a brutal mass murder. It's a 400-year-old mystery and also Australia's greatest cold case. Welcome! Today, we're counting down our picks for the top 10 scariest archaeological discoveries. It was very common to put a sickle over the neck of the person who could be a vampire. For this list, we'll be looking at the most terrifying and disturbing archaeological finds ever made. Which of these freaks you out the most? Let us know in the comments. Number 10, the Pit of Bones. In 1987, researchers in the Atapuerca Mountains in Spain discovered a cave housing the skeletal remains of at least 28 people. Anyone digging here is almost sure to make an interesting find. The bones were dated around 430,000 BC, and after years of effort, the researchers discovered that one of the deceased had been murdered. They painstakingly pieced the skull back together and found 2 head wounds. The age and sex of the victim were unclear, but what could be determined was that they had been repeatedly hit with a blunt object, such as a spear or stone axe. Paleoanthropologists managed to reconstruct the partial skulls of at least 20 hominins from the pit, and most of them appeared to have suffered and survived bone-breaking blows to the head. It's eerie to think that this crime may have gone undiscovered for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, archaeologists are eager to develop a deeper understanding of how early humans lived, settled, and migrated across Western Europe. Number 9, the Knife-Armed Man. In 2018, archaeologists in northern Italy discovered some fascinating remains at a mass burial site dating back to somewhere between the 6th and 8th century CE. One of the deceased was a middle-aged man whose arm had been amputated below the elbow and replaced with a knife. Upon further examination, the researchers found evidence that he had worn the weapon as a prosthesis. Signs of extreme wear on his teeth and an unusual bone ridge in his shoulder suggested that he had held the knife with straps that he frequently tightened with his mouth. A buckle and some decomposed material, thought to be leather, were also found near the pointy prosthesis. Serious medieval badass or terrifying old-timey serial killer? You decide. Number 8, the Scottish Frankenstein mummies. The inexplicable is often creepy, as is the case here. In 2001, an excavation at a Bronze Age settlement in Scotland uncovered 2 skeletons, one male and one female, approximately 3,000 years old. The bodies had been intentionally mummified, preserved in peat bogs to slow decomposition. This was the first evidence of mummification in prehistoric Europe. However, a closer inspection revealed something truly unsettling. The skeletons were composed of parts from multiple individuals. The female skeleton had a male skull, a female torso, and an unidentified arm. Even more bizarrely, in her hands, she was holding 2 of the male skull's teeth. The male skeleton was made from the bones of 3 separate men. Essentially, they were human jigsaw puzzles with no known explanation. Number 7, a prison for witches. The introduction of Scotland's witchcraft laws in the 16th century led to sensationalized trials known as the Great Scottish Witch Hunt. This was a society where people really believed in magic and supernatural beings. You could meet the devil walking down a street. In 1597, there were 31 witch trials in Aberdeen alone. What did they do with the suspected witches? According to research, St. Mary's Chapel, a local church, was used as a prison for those accused. The building still contains a 2-inch iron ring embedded in the wall, which archives show was used to chain the accused. People genuinely feared witches, believing they could kill livestock, make crops fail, drown people, or harm children. Number 6, ancient chemical warfare. In 2009, during an excavation in Dura Europos, an ancient Roman city in modern-day Syria, archaeologists found evidence of one of the earliest known cases of chemical warfare. During the siege of Dura Europos in 256 CE, Persian attackers dug tunnels beneath the city. In response, 20 Roman soldiers attempted to defend their stronghold by tunneling back, but instead of facing swords or spears, they were met with a lethal cloud of sulfur dioxide. The Persians had set sulfur and pitch on fire, creating a toxic gas that turned into acid when inhaled, killing the Romans almost instantly. While chemical warfare is often seen as a modern invention, its origins clearly date back much further. Number 5, Franklin's Lost Expedition. In 1845, 2 British ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, set off from England on an expedition led by Sir John Franklin. Franklin was a seasoned explorer hoping to navigate the Northwest Passage through the Canadian Arctic. However, both ships disappeared, becoming one of the greatest mysteries in naval history. A seasoned explorer had mapped 2,000 miles of Arctic coastline early in his career. A close encounter with starvation had earned him public fame as the man who ate his boots. The two vessels, carrying 129 crew members in total, soon became trapped in the ice and were never heard from again. And there was nothing around them but pack ice, just a wilderness of white, empty pack ice. There was no going forward. There was no going back. The sailors on board were exposed to terrible conditions and began dying of various causes, including lead poisoning and hypothermia. Most died of starvation after abandoning their ships and attempting to walk south. Later expeditions made some truly gory discoveries among the wreckage, findings that seemed to suggest that some of the sailors had turned to cannibalism when they ran out of food. Number 4. Vampire Graves. This grave has really awakened the interests of everyone. Upon excavating a 17th-century cemetery in Drabsko, Poland, researchers discovered a few odd graves. Some of the deceased had been buried with heavy stones or sickles placed on their necks. It is thought that these measures were meant to prevent any posthumous mischief. We found a female skeleton with an iron sickle around her neck and a padlock on her toe. When news broke, headlines described the shocking find as a female vampire. Traditional Slavic cultures were known to cremate their dead as they believed only this process would release their souls. However, sometime between the 7th and 9th centuries, after missionaries converted them to Christianity, they began burying their dead instead. This new burial practice seemed to have provoked certain fears, prompting people to take extreme measures to prevent the dead from rising as vampires. Until the 19th century, people used to believe that vampires were one of the most active demonic creatures. Number 3. Ashkelon's unwanted babies. Ashkelon, in southern Israel, was the site of an unfortunate discovery in 1988. Beneath a bathhouse in a sewer dating back to the late Roman, early Byzantine era, archaeologists found the skeletal remains of almost 100 newborns. It's a bit grisly, don't you think? It is grisly. Because of that, we spent a lot of time and effort trying to find out the whys and wherefores. The skeleton showed no signs of injury or trauma, and an examination of their teeth indicated that they had lived for less than 3 days. It was initially believed that the discarded infants would be female, as was consistent with widespread practices at the time. However, researchers later determined that the remains found in the sewer came from both sexes. One possible explanation is that the babies were discarded by sex workers who made their living in the bathhouse. Well, I think we conclude from this that the babies were unwanted and that they were disposed of so that the mothers could get back to work as quickly as possible. Number 2. The sacrificial pits of Shirmao. Many assumed it was the remains of the Great Wall of China, but with excavations, it turned out to be something quite different. Shirmao, a site along the Great Wall of China, is a large, fortified Bronze Age settlement that contains a stepped pyramid. Underneath the pyramid, archaeologists discovered at least 6 pits filled with numerous human skulls. The skulls belong to 80 young girls and are widely believed to have been the result of human sacrifices. They were not dumped but carefully placed, meaning they could have been ritual decapitations. It turns out that, in ancient China, sacrifices were a common practice for a number of reasons. In some cases, they were made as offerings to the river god Hubwa. In others, they were performed as funeral rites, where slaves were buried with their owners or concubines with their lords. However, it is still unclear why exactly these 80 girls were sacrificed. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into settings and switch on your notifications. Number 1. Australia's Murder Island. You know, it's a hard story to get your head around, and it doesn't fit with kind of those great stories, you know, the Captain Cooks and explorers and all of that stuff. As if Australia didn't already have enough scary things, there's also a place dubbed Murder Island. Officially named Beacon Island, the site got its alias because of the events of 1629. That year, a Dutch vessel called the Batavia embarked on its maiden voyage, carrying soldiers, sailors, and civilians to what is now Indonesia. A failed mutiny attempt on board caused a shipwreck, and dozens drowned. A few hundred survivors were left stranded on nearby Beacon Island. Mutineers went on a rampage, murdering 125 of the survivors. No less than 125 men, women, and children died on this tiny island in just 3 months. To this day, it remains Australia's first and biggest mass murder. Almost 400 years after the unfortunate events, scientists were still unearthing the remains of the murder victims and others who managed to escape the massacre. They just turned the world upside down. A real-life Lord of the Flies stuff, well, totally Lord of the Flies.